Listen closely to the low, guttural vibration in the asphalt. Before the frantic 911 calls, before the sensationalized headlines and the flashing blue lights, there was only a terrified woman, a broken system, and the heavy metallic scent of exhaust. 200 Hell's Angels rolling in formation down a quiet street isn't a parade, it's an earthquake. When the police turn a blind eye and the wolves are at the door, what happens when you beg the outlaws for salvation? Rain slicked the cracked linoleum of the hallway, blown in through a front window that had been shattered 6 hours earlier. Anna knelt by the glass, a plastic dustpan in one hand, and a cheap whisk broom in the other, but she wasn't moving. She just stared at a jagged shard reflecting the flickering fluorescent light overhead. Her knees ached. A dull, throbbing pain sat directly behind her right eye, born of too much burnt coffee and 48 hours without sleep. The air in the safe harbor women's refuge smelled perpetually of cheap bleach, powdered formula, and old fear. Tonight, another scent hung in the drafty corridors: gasoline. Earlier that afternoon, Tommy and his crew had left a soaked rag sitting on the concrete steps. A quiet promise. Tommy wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a 22-year-old meth distributor with too much territory and a fragile ego. The shelter sat right in the middle of a block he wanted cleared for his dead drop operations. 3 days ago, he demanded they board up and leave. 2 days ago, they cut the phone lines. Today, the brick through the window. Tonight, the rag. Anna finally swept the glass into the pan. Her hands shook, not with defiant cinematic rage, but with the ugly, hollow tremor of pure exhaustion. She was 34, wearing a faded gray cardigan over a scrub top, her hair tied back in an untidy knot. She was not a fighter. Did dispatch say anything else? Anna looked up. Brenda stood in the doorway of the common room, wrapping a thin fleece blanket around her shoulders. Brenda was 19, 7 months pregnant, and possessed a nervous tic that made her chew the inside of her lip until it bled. They said they logged the report. Anna kept her voice low, purposely flat to hide the shake. They said if we see fire, call back. Until then, there's no patrol car available. End of the month. Short-staffed. Brenda chewed her lip. They're coming back tonight, Anna. Tommy told Ricky he was going to smoke us out like rats. Anna stood, dumping the glass into a heavy black trash bag. It made a sickening, hollow clatter. She looked down the hall. Behind 3 hollow-core wooden doors, 12 women and 5 children were trying to sleep on second-hand mattresses. The locks on those doors were a joke. A heavy boot could splinter the frames in one kick. She walked into the tiny office she shared with a rusted filing cabinet and an ancient desktop computer. Through the reinforced security grate on the remaining intact window, she stared at the street. It was deserted. The street lamps flickered, casting long, menacing shadows across the slick pavement. The cops weren't coming. The city had written this block off years ago. A heavy, dark realization settled in her stomach like swallowing lead. They were entirely alone. If Tommy showed up with 10 guys, gasoline, and baseball bats, Anna would be standing between them and the women, with nothing but a broom handle and a pepper spray canister that expired in 2023. She looked at her keys sitting on the desk next to a stack of unpaid electric bills. Attached to the ring was a heavy, tarnished brass bottle opener she'd found on the street a week ago. Stamped into the metal was a winged death's head. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A week prior, she had been at a gas station 3 towns over, filling her rusted Honda Civic. A dozen men in leather cuts had rolled up. The noise had been deafening. She remembered the sheer physical space they took up, the undeniable gravity of their presence. Nobody looked at them too long. Nobody asked them to move. They commanded the environment simply by existing within it. Anna grabbed her keys. The metal teeth dug sharply into her palm. It was a stupid, suicidal thought. A desperate, irrational pivot. "Brenda," Anna said, walking back out to the hallway. "Lock the reinforced door behind me. Throw the deadbolt. Do not open it for anyone but me." Brenda's eyes went wide. "Where are you going?" "To try something stupid," Anna replied. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't have the energy left to lie. Mud splashed against the hem of Anna's jeans as she stepped out of her car. The neon sign above the window hummed with a faulty ballast, buzzing like an angry hornet. The rusty anchor. It wasn't an anchor, and it wasn't rusty. It was a cinder-block bunker sitting on the edge of the county line, flanked by rows of gleaming chrome-heavy motorcycles. The smell hit her before she even pulled the heavy oak door open. Damp leather, stale cigarette smoke baked into drywall, and the sour yeast of spilled beer. She stepped inside. The movies always get it wrong. The music didn't suddenly stop with the screech of a needle on vinyl. The patrons didn't all turn to look at her in synchronized menace. Instead, the heavy southern rock continued to play from a corner jukebox, and the low hum of gruff voices merely dipped a fraction. But she felt the shift. It was a sudden, heavy atmospheric pressure. 50 men occupied the space. Denim, leather, heavy boots, and thick beards. She felt obscenely out of place in her cardigan and practical nursing clogs. Her chest tightened, panic rising hot and sharp in her throat. She wanted to turn around. She wanted to run back to her car, lock the doors, and cry. Instead, she forced her legs to move forward. The floorboards were sticky. She approached the bar. The bartender, an older man with a braided gray beard and a faded tattoo across his throat, didn't ask what she wanted. He just stared at her, a dirty rag pausing in his hand. "I need..." Anna's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tasting copper. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge." A man sitting 2 stools down let out a low, breathy chuckle. He didn't look at her. "Ain't no managers here, lady. Try the Applebee's down the highway," the bartender rasped, turning away to wipe down a beer tap. "Please," Anna said. Her voice wasn't loud, but the desperation in it had an ugly, sharp edge that cut through the background noise. It wasn't a polite request. It was the sound of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. The air shifted again. From the back corner, near a pool table bathed in a harsh yellow light, a man stood up. He was tall, thick through the chest, wearing a leather cut over a black hoodie. The bottom rocker on his back read his state. The top read the club name. He walked over slowly. The heavy thud of his boots on the wood floor seemed to synchronize with the beating of Anna's heart. Up close, he smelled of engine grease, tobacco, and something faintly metallic. His face was weathered, deeply lined around the eyes, with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The name patch on his chest read Grip. He stopped about 3 feet from her. He didn't speak. He just looked down, his eyes entirely flat, devoid of the aggressive hostility she expected, but equally devoid of any warmth. Anna swallowed hard. "Are you in charge?" "Depends on who's asking," Grip said. His voice was a low rumble, quieter than she anticipated. "My name is Anna. I run the safe harbor shelter on 4th and Elm. It's for women, battered women, kids." She was talking too fast, her words stumbling over one another. "There's a local crew. Tommy Higgins. They sell out of the abandoned lot next door. They want us gone. They broke our windows. Tonight, they left a gas-soaked rag on the steps." Grip reached into his pocket, pulled out a battered Zippo lighter, and flipped it open and closed. Clack, clack. "Sounds like a problem for the cops, Anna." "The cops aren't coming," Anna said, her voice dropping. The anger finally broke through the exhaustion. "They don't care. We're an eyesore. We're a liability. They told me to call back when the building is actually on fire." Grip stopped flipping the lighter. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face. He noted the dark, bruised-looking bags under her eyes, the trembling of her hands where she gripped the edge of the sticky bar, the utter lack of pretense in her posture. She wasn't an activist trying to make a point. She was an animal backed into a corner. "And you thought coming to a Hells Angels clubhouse was the next logical step?" Grip asked, a dry, cynical edge to his tone. "What do you want me to do? Host a bake sale for you?" "I want you to scare them away," Anna blurted out. She felt her face flush with humiliated heat. It sounded so childish out loud. Please, please help us tonight. Just tonight. Just park your bikes out front. Stand there. Show them we aren't alone. I don't have money. I don't have anything to give you. But there are 5 children in that house who are going to burn to death tonight if nobody stands in front of that door. Silence stretched between them. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. Grip looked past her, toward the window, then down at the bar. He rubbed a thick thumb over the Zippo. The bartender stopped wiping down the counter. The guys at the pool table had stopped playing. Grip looked back at Anna. He didn't nod. He didn't offer a reassuring smile or a heroic promise. His expression remained entirely unreadable, a stone wall of absolute indifference. "Go home, lady," Grip said quietly. "Lock your doors." He turned his back on her and walked back to the pool table. Anna stood there for 3 agonizing seconds. The rejection felt like a physical blow to her stomach. She had debased herself, walked into the lion's den, and been swatted away like a nuisance. Tears of absolute frustration pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She spun on her heel, pushed open the heavy oak door, and walked out into the cold rain. The drive back to the shelter was a blur of smeared windshield wipers and the suffocating realization of her own foolishness. What had she been thinking? They were a motorcycle club, not a neighborhood watch. They had their own business, their own codes. To them, she was just a hysterical civilian dragging street trash to their doorstep. She parked the Honda behind the shelter, killing the engine. The silence of the car felt oppressive. She grabbed her keys and sprinted through the rain to the heavy steel back door, rapping her knuckles against it in a frantic rhythm. Brenda threw the deadbolt and pulled her inside. "Well?" Brenda asked, her eyes darting to Anna's soaked hair. "Nothing." Anna lied smoothly, stepping out of her wet shoes. "Just drove the perimeter. Nobody's out there yet." The lie tasted like ash. She walked into the common room. The digital clock on the wall read 11:42 p.m. The house was dead quiet, save for the rattling of the ancient HVAC unit. She took a seat on a folding metal chair facing the front window. She turned off the interior lights. The street lamp outside cast a harsh, angled beam across the floor. Now, there was nothing to do but wait. Midnight passed, then 12:30. Anna's eyelids grew heavy. Her chin dropped toward her chest. She jerked awake violently as a sharp, echoing crack split the silence outside. She shot up from the chair, creeping toward the edge of the window frame. 3 cars had pulled up to the curb, their headlights cutting bright, blinding swaths through the driving rain. They were beat-up sedans, engines idling rough. Car doors slammed, one after another. Anna counted the shadows moving in the harsh light. 4, 7, 10, 12. Tommy Higgins stepped into the glow of the street lamp. He was wearing a damp gray tracksuit, a baseball cap pulled low. In his right hand, he held a red plastic jerry can. The man next to him dragged an aluminum baseball bat across the wet concrete. It made a horrific scraping shriek that set Anna's teeth on edge. "Brenda," Anna hissed over her shoulder, "get everybody into the basement now. Lock the cellar door from the inside." Brenda appeared like a ghost in the hallway, her face completely drained of color. She didn't argue. She turned and vanished to wake the women. Anna grabbed the wooden broom handle she had left leaning against the desk. The wood was splintered and felt impossibly light in her hands. A pathetic weapon. She walked to the front door, standing just behind the wood and steel. Outside, a voice yelled, "Hey nurse, rent's due!" Something heavy slammed against the reinforced door. The frame groaned. Dust drifted down from the door jamb. "We told you to clear out." Tommy's voice was muffled but shrill, laced with the frantic energy of whatever chemical he was riding. "I'm giving you 3 minutes to bring everyone out the back, or I'm lighting the front steps." Anna squeezed her eyes shut. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She placed her forehead against the cold steel of the door. "Please," she thought, "to God, to the universe, to the void. Please." Another heavy blow hit the door. The wood splintered near the deadbolt. They were kicking it. 2 minutes! Tommy screamed. A glass bottle shattered against the brick siding of the house. Anna raised the broom handle, stepping back into a defensive stance she had only seen in movies. Her legs felt like water. She was going to die here. The realization was cold and sharp. Then she felt it. It didn't start as a sound. It started as a pressure in the soles of her feet, a subtle vibration rising through the foundation of the house. Outside, the yelling abruptly stopped. The scrape of the aluminum bat ceased. The vibration grew, translating from feeling into sound. It was a low, mechanical growl, deep and resonant. It sounded like an approaching storm front, but steady, mechanical, and infinitely more menacing. Anna crept back to the window, peeking through the corner of the blinds. At the far end of the block, 2 headlights turned the corner. Then 4, then 10, then 50. They poured onto the narrow suburban street, like a slow-moving river of steel and chrome. The noise was no longer a growl. It was a deafening roar that vibrated against the glass of the shelter's windows and shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. 200 motorcycles. They rode in a tight, disciplined 2x2 formation. There was no shouting, no revving of engines for show. There was just the relentless, overwhelming thunder of massive V-twin engines moving at 10 miles per hour, an armored column of leather and dark metal consuming the road. Tommy and his crew stood frozen on the sidewalk. The bravado evaporated from their posture instantly. The boy with the baseball bat let the tip drop to the wet pavement. Tommy stood paralyzed, the red jerry can hanging limply from his hand. The column didn't pass the house. The lead bikes, driven by massive men wearing heavy leather coats over their cuts, pulled up directly to the curb in front of the safe harbor refuge. The bikes behind them flanked out, killing their forward momentum, parking at an angle until they completely barricaded the street in both directions. The street was sealed. 200 engines idled in the rain. The air instantly filled with the sharp, toxic tang of high-octane exhaust and hot metal. No one dismounted right away. They just sat on their bikes, staring in dead silence at the 12 street thugs gathered on the steps. From the center of the pack, one rider slowly put his kickstand down. The heavy metal scraped against the asphalt. He swung a heavy booted leg over the seat and stepped onto the pavement. It was Grip. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't yell. He simply walked through the rain, his boots splashing softly in the puddles, until he stopped 10 feet away from Tommy Higgins. Grip looked at the jerry can. Then he looked at Tommy's face. The silence beneath the rumble of the engines was suffocating. Anna held her breath, her hands still gripping the broom handle, completely forgotten. Grip reached into his jacket pocket. Tommy flinched, taking a half step backward. But Grip only pulled out his battered Zippo. He flipped it open. Clack. The flame illuminated his scarred eyebrow. He lit a cigarette, took a slow drag, and snapped the lighter shut. "You lost?" Grip asked. His voice didn't carry over the engines, but the way his jaw moved made the words clear. Tommy opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The 12 thugs were surrounded. Everywhere they looked, imposing men with hard eyes and club patches were watching them. No one was smiling. The sheer arithmetic of the situation was crushing. 200 against 12. "This is—" Tommy stammered, his voice cracking. "This ain't your business, man. This is local." Grip took another drag of his cigarette. He exhaled the smoke slowly, letting the rain wash it away. He stepped forward, closing the distance until he was inches from Tommy's face. The physical size difference was jarring. Grip looked down. "I'm going to tell you this once," Grip said, his voice finally carrying just loud enough for Anna to hear through the cracked glass. "This building belongs to us now. The street belongs to us now. If a window breaks, I'm coming to your house. If a tire goes flat, I'm coming to your house. If this lady so much as trips on a crack in the sidewalk, I'm going to assume you put it there." Tommy swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the sea of leather and chrome surrounding him. "We didn't know." "You know now," Grip said. He didn't raise a hand, but he shifted his weight slightly. Leave the gas. Take your trash. Walk away. Don't drive. Walk. Tommy dropped the red jerry can. It hit the pavement with a hollow plastic thud, gasoline splashing over his expensive sneakers. He didn't look back at his crew. He just turned and started walking quickly down the center of the street, head down, threading through the maze of idling motorcycles. One by one, the rest of the crew dropped their bats and pipes, abandoning their cars, scrambling into the dark like roaches fleeing a flashlight. Grip stood on the sidewalk, smoking his cigarette, watching them disappear into the rain. Anna felt her legs finally give out. She slid down the wall, hitting the floor with a soft thud. The broom handle clattered away. She brought her hands to her face, her chest heaving as the raw adrenaline finally shattered, leaving her weeping silently against her palms. The rumble of the engines continued outside, a deep, steady heartbeat in the darkness. They didn't leave. They stayed parked in the rain, a wall of iron and leather standing between the shelter and the rest of the world. Gray light bled through the warped plastic blinds, painting harsh stripes across the linoleum. Anna peeled her cheek off the floor. Her neck screamed in protest, muscles locked rigid from hours spent curled into a defensive ball against the baseboards. Her mouth tasted like old pennies and stale fear. She sat up slowly. The broom handle lay a few feet away, a pathetic monument to the night before. It wasn't a dream. The sharp, toxic scent of gasoline still hung heavy in the foyer, seeping under the door frame from Tommy's dropped jerry can. But beneath it was something else. A smell that belonged to highway truck stops and industrial garages. Wet leather, hot iron, and stale tobacco. Anna grabbed the edge of the reception desk and pulled herself upright. Her knees popped in the quiet house. Behind her, the heavy cellar door remained deadbolted. Brenda and the others were still down there, hiding in the damp dark. She walked to the front window and pulled the blind down just a fraction of an inch. Morning had stripped away the cinematic shadows of the night, leaving behind a stark, ugly reality. The street was slick with dirty rainwater. The 200 motorcycles were gone. The deafening apocalyptic roar had faded. But the street was not empty. Parked at aggressive, jagged angles across the front of the shelter and the adjacent abandoned lot were 12 massive bikes. They formed an iron barricade. 5 men sat on the low cinder block wall that bordered the property. 4 more were leaning against the front fenders of Tommy's abandoned sedans. They looked exhausted. Heavy dark circles bruised the skin under their eyes. Their leather cuts were soaked through, dripping black water onto the concrete. One man, a massive guy with a braided beard tucked into his jacket, was asleep sitting straight up against a street lamp. Grip sat on the top step of the shelter's porch. He wasn't sleeping. He had a hunting knife in one hand and a piece of scrap wood in the other, methodically shaving long, curling ribbons of pine onto the wet cement. Shk, shk, shk. The rhythmic sound of the blade was the only noise on the entire block. Anna stepped back from the window. She went into the tiny staff kitchen. Her hands still shook as she filled the commercial coffee maker, dumping 3 scoops of cheap, generic grounds into the filter. She waited while it brewed, listening to the hiss and spit of the machine. She found a sleeve of styrofoam cups and poured 5 of them, arranging them on a plastic serving tray that usually held graham crackers for the kids. Unlocking the deadbolt felt like defusing a bomb. The metal mechanism clacked loudly. She turned the knob and pushed. The door groaned, the splintered wood of the frame catching on the hinges before giving way. The cold morning air hit her instantly, biting through her thin cardigan. Grip stopped whittling. He didn't turn around. The other men in the yard shifted. Heavy boots scraped against gravel. Eyes turned toward her. They were not friendly eyes. They were guarded, flat, and deeply tired. "I made coffee," Anna said. Her voice sounded thin and entirely inadequate. Grip finally turned his head. He looked at the plastic tray, then up at her face. He stood up slowly, joints cracking. He was even taller in the daylight, casting a long shadow over the steps. He sheathed the hunting knife at his belt and walked up to the door. He didn't say thank you. He just took one of the styrofoam cups in a massive, grease-stained hand. The cup looked fragile, ready to crush under his grip. "It's black," Anna offered, nervously holding the tray out toward the others. A younger guy with a teardrop tattoo under his left eye walked up and took a cup. Then another man. Nobody spoke. They sipped the scalding, bitter liquid in silence. "You didn't have to stay," Anna said, looking at Grip. "They ran away. You scared them off." Grip took a sip of the coffee. He grimaced slightly at the taste, but swallowed it down. "Rats come back when the lights go out. They left their cars. They'll be back for the cars." "So you're just staying until we decide we're done," Grip said flatly. It wasn't a comforting promise. It was a statement of territorial control. Anna realized then, with a cold knot tightening in her stomach, that this wasn't charity. She hadn't hired a security firm. She had invited an apex predator into her yard to chase away the scavengers. The Hells Angels didn't take orders from a shelter director. They operated on their own violently upheld code of respect and dominance. Tommy had disrespected them by ignoring the line they drew. Now, the shelter was simply the ground they had chosen to stand on. "The police usually drive by around 8, Anna warned quietly, looking down the street. Grip let out a short, humorless breath through his nose. "Let 'em drive." He turned his back to her, walking down the steps to lean against the rusted hood of Tommy's sedan. The conversation was over. Anna stood in the doorway holding the tray with 2 cold cups of coffee left. She looked at the men, these outlaws in soaked leather, and then back into the dim, bleach-smelling hallway of the refuge. She had traded one kind of fear for another, but as she listened to the quiet, steady breathing of the house behind her, she knew one thing for certain. Tonight, her women would sleep in beds, not on a concrete basement floor. She stepped back inside and closed the broken door. Tuesday brought a suffocating, bizarre normalcy to the block. By noon, a flatbed tow truck had arrived. Grip had stood in the center of the street smoking a cigarette, while the driver nervously hooked up Tommy's abandoned sedans. The tow truck driver didn't ask for paperwork. He didn't ask questions. He hooked the chains, sweating profusely despite the cool air, and dragged the cars away. Inside the shelter, the atmosphere was a tangled knot of profound relief and utter terror. Brenda refused to go near the front windows. "They're criminals, Anna," she hissed in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing a pot in the sink. "Do you know what those guys do? Do you know what they sell? My cousin got wrapped up with a club out in Reno. It doesn't end with them just doing you a favor." "They haven't asked for a favor," Anna replied, sorting through a box of donated winter coats. "They haven't asked for anything." "Yet," Brenda shot back, chewing on her lip. "They haven't asked yet." Anna couldn't argue. The contradiction gnawed at her too. She watched them through the security grate in her office. The rotation changed every 8 hours. It was a highly organized logistical operation. 10 bikes would roll in, 10 would roll out. They brought coolers of water and foil-wrapped sandwiches. They sat on lawn chairs they had produced from somewhere, taking up the entire sidewalk. The neighborhood, usually buzzing with the low-level hum of street corner commerce and stray dogs, was completely dead. The local drug dealers had vanished. The petty thieves moved to the next zip code. Even the mail carriers seemed to walk faster, dropping the letters into the slot without making eye contact with the massive man sitting on the porch. At 3 p.m., the absurdity of the situation peaked. Anna was in the common room trying to fix a broken DVD player for the kids. A loud, repetitive hammering echoed from the front of the building. Bang, bang, bang. She froze, dropping the screwdriver. Brenda gasped from the hallway, clutching her pregnant belly. Anna walked slowly to the front door and pulled it open. A man named Chibbs, a squat, barrel-chested biker with arms covered in faded prison ink, was kneeling on her front stoop. He had a heavy steel hammer in one hand and a mouthful of galvanized nails. Beside him lay 2 thick planks of treated oak. He looked up at Anna, spat the nails into his greasy palm, and scowled. "Frames shot," Chibbs growled. His voice sounded like gravel being crushed in a cement mixer. "Wood's rotten all the way down to the sill. You try to lock that deadbolt, a stiff wind is going to blow it open. I know, Anna said. We don't have the budget for a contractor right now. Chibbs didn't offer a sympathetic nod. He just grunted, picked up one of the oak planks, and jammed it against the shattered door jamb. Hold this, he barked. Anna blinked. What? Hold the wood. Put your weight against it. I need 2 hands to sink the lag screws. Anna stepped out onto the porch in her socks. She pressed her shoulder against the rough, heavy oak plank, pushing it flush against the brick. Chibbs pulled a massive power drill from a saddlebag sitting on the steps. He didn't ask if she was comfortable. He just leaned in, the smell of stale beer and motor oil overwhelming, and drove 3 massive screws through the wood and into the structural beam of the house. The noise was deafening. While he worked, the front door of the shelter creaked open wider. Leo, a 4-year-old boy belonging to a woman named Maria who was hiding out from an abusive ex-husband, wandered onto the porch. He was wearing mismatched socks and holding a plastic dinosaur missing its tail. Anna's heart stopped. The mothers were strictly told to keep the children away from the front of the house. Leo, no, Anna whispered frantically, trapped under the weight of the oak plank. Leo didn't listen. He waddled right up to Chibbs. The boy stared at the massive biker, his eyes wide, completely devoid of the fear that paralyzed the adults. He reached out with his free hand and poked the heavy silver chain hanging from Chibbs's heavy leather belt. Chibbs stopped drilling. The sudden silence was terrifying. The biker slowly turned his head, looking down at the tiny hand touching his gear. Anna held her breath. She imagined Chibbs snapping, yelling at the kid, the fragile truce shattering in an instant. Chibbs stared at Leo. Leo stared back, offering the broken plastic dinosaur upward as a peace offering. The biker let out a long, heavy sigh. He didn't smile. He didn't suddenly soften into a gentle giant. He reached out with a thick, calloused finger and tapped the plastic dinosaur on the nose. T-Rex, Chibbs grumbled, his face completely deadpan. Good bite force, terrible reach. Go back inside, kid. You're stepping in sawdust. He didn't wait for a reaction. He turned back to the door frame, raised the drill, and drove the final screw home with a violent burst of noise. Maria appeared in the doorway, her face pale with terror. She scooped Leo up without a word and vanished back into the dark hallway. Chibbs packed up his drill. He wiped a smear of grease off his forehead with the back of his wrist. He looked at the newly reinforced door frame, tested it with a heavy shove, and nodded once. Deadbolt catches now, he said, not looking at Anna. He picked up his saddlebag and walked down the steps toward his parked bike. Thank you, Anna called out after him. Chibbs paused by his motorcycle. He turned his head slightly, spitting on the asphalt. Don't thank me, lady. It looked like shit. I hate looking at shoddy carpentry. He threw his leg over the bike and started the engine, drowning out any possible reply. Anna stood on the porch, feeling the solid, splinter-free grain of the new oak frame. It was a crude, ugly fix. It didn't match the rest of the house. It was bolted on with industrial hardware meant for holding together heavy machinery. But as she ran her hand over the wood, she realized it was the strongest thing on the entire building. She went back inside and closed the door. The deadbolt slid into place with a heavy, satisfying clunk. For the first time in 3 weeks, Anna leaned her back against the door, slid down to the floor, and allowed herself to close her eyes without keeping one ear locked on the sounds of the street. The wolves were outside, and for tonight, at least, they were keeping the monsters at bay. Wednesday evening dragged the humidity up from the pavement like a heavy, wet blanket. The rain had finally quit, leaving behind a stagnant heat that smelled of rotting leaves, hot roofing tar, and the faint, ever-present tang of exhaust. Inside the shelter, the window air conditioning unit rattled out its death rattle, blowing tepid air across the common room. Anna sat at the reception desk, pressing a cold, sweating can of generic cola against her forehead. Her muscles ached with a deep, persistent fatigue. The sheer surrealism of the last 48 hours had hollowed her out. Through the reinforced security grate, She watched the street. The shift had changed an hour ago. 15 heavy motorcycles were parked in a diagonal blockade across the front of the property. The men on duty were quiet today. A few smoked. Two were playing cards on the hood of a rusted, abandoned washing machine across the street. Grip sat in a folding canvas chair near the front steps, his heavy leather cut draped over the back of the seat, revealing arms thick with faded, sprawling ink. He was meticulously cleaning the lenses of his sunglasses with a microfiber cloth. Then the strobes arrived. It wasn't the frantic, screaming wail of a high-speed pursuit. It was a lazy, authoritative whoop-whoop that vibrated through the single-pane glass of Anna's office. Harsh red and blue lights bounced off the cracked plaster of the hallway walls, strobing violently over the children's drawings tacked to the corkboard. Anna dropped the soda can. It clattered against the desk. She hurried to the front door, pulling it open just as two police cruisers angled themselves into the intersection, effectively blocking the road. 4 officers stepped out. They wore dark blue uniforms, the cheap polyester stained with dark patches of sweat under their arms. Their hands rested casually yet deliberately on their heavy black leather duty belts, right above the holsters of their service weapons. The neighborhood, which had been holding its breath for 2 days, seemed to go perfectly silent. The bikers didn't scramble. They didn't shout. The men playing cards put their hands flat on the rusted metal washing machine. The men leaning against their bikes simply stood up straight. They formed a loose, unhurried semicircle facing the street. The air grew thick. It was a sudden primal shift in the atmosphere, a heavy, suffocating pressure that made the hairs on Anna's arms stand up. A heavy-set officer with a shaved head and a nameplate that read Davis walked forward. He stopped 10 feet from the bikes, thumbs hooked into his belt. He looked at the blockade, then up at the shelter, his face curled into a sneer of absolute disgust. Grip didn't stand up immediately. He finished wiping his sunglasses, folded them, and slid them into his shirt pocket. Only then did he rise from the canvas chair, his boots crunching loudly on the loose gravel of the driveway. He walked toward Davis, stopping just short of the curb. "You're blocking a public roadway," Officer Davis barked. His voice was loud, meant to project authority, but it had a thin, reedy edge of nervousness underneath it. Grip stared at him. His face was a mask of bored indifference. "Street's closed, officer. Potholes." Davis's face flushed a dull, angry red. "Don't play stupid with me. I've got 3 complaints of gang activity disrupting a residential block. Move the bikes, or I'm calling in the flatbeds and impounding every single piece of scrap metal sitting here." Grip took a slow, deliberate step forward. The size difference was striking. Davis was bulky, padded by a bulletproof vest, but Grip was a wall of dense muscle and scarred bone. "Call the trucks," Grip said quietly. His voice didn't rise above a low rumble. "See how many tow drivers want to hook a chain to club property. See how long their trucks stay running." It was a threat, naked, absolute, and delivered without a single aggressive gesture. Davis unclipped the safety strap on his holster. Snap. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the sticky evening air. The 3 officers behind him tensed, dropping their hands squarely onto the grips of their guns. Behind Grip, 15 men in leather shifted their weight. Hands slid into pockets. Jackets fell open to reveal heavy bulges at their waistbands. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. She tasted copper. It was going to happen right here, a massacre on her front lawn. The violence she had been trying to prevent was about to erupt in a hail of police gunfire and outlaw retaliation. She didn't think. She just moved. "Stop!" Anna shoved the heavy oak door open and half ran down the concrete steps. Her scrub top stuck to her sweating back. She pushed her way past a massive biker with a scarred neck and stepped directly into the space between Grip and Officer Davis. Davis blinked, startled by the sudden appearance of a woman in a cardigan. "Ma'am, step back. This is an active police situation." "There is no situation," Anna said. Her voice shook, ugly and shrill, but she forced the words out. "They aren't gang activity. They're my guests." Davis stared at her, utterly bewildered. "Your guests? Lady, do you know who these men are? Do you have any idea what they do? I know that when I called dispatch 3 days ago begging for a patrol car because local dealers were threatening to burn this shelter down with women and children inside, I was told there was no one available. Anna shot back. The anger finally eclipsed the fear. She pointed a trembling finger at the cracked brick of the refuge. I know that Tommy Higgins left a gasoline-soaked rag on my steps, and the police department told me to call back when the flames started. Davis shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. We have limited resources, ma'am. You can't just hire a motorcycle club as a private militia. I didn't hire anyone, Anna said, her voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. They just showed up, and ever since they did, nobody has thrown a brick through my window. So unless you plan on parking that cruiser right here for the next month, you can get off my property. Davis opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Anna's exhausted, furious face. Then he looked over her shoulder at Grip, who was watching the exchange with dead, unblinking eyes. Finally, Davis looked at the 15 other heavily armed men flanking the yard. The math was simple, and the paperwork for a bloodbath wasn't worth his pension. Fine, Davis spat. He reclipped his holster with an angry snap. You want to sleep with dogs, lady. Don't cry when you wake up with fleas. When this goes sideways, lose our number. He turned on his heel and walked back to the cruiser. The other 3 officers backed away slowly, getting into their cars. The engines revved and the cruisers threw themselves into reverse, backing out of the intersection and speeding off into the dark. The flashing strobes vanished. The heavy silence rushed back in. Anna stood on the curb, her chest heaving. The adrenaline burned through her veins like acid. She had just defended a violent outlaw motorcycle club against the police. She had drawn a line in the sand, and she had chosen the wrong side of the law. She felt dirty. She felt completely alienated from the civilized world. She turned around. Grip was looking at her. The bored indifference was gone. In its place was something sharp, analytical, and heavily guarded. He didn't offer a smile or a word of gratitude. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out his Zippo, and lit a cigarette. Go inside, Anna, Grip said quietly, exhaling a long plume of blue smoke into the humid air. Lock the door. She didn't argue. She walked up the steps, her legs feeling like lead, and locked the heavy deadbolt behind her. Thursday morning, 2 a.m. The heat hadn't broken. The inside of the shelter felt like the inside of a closed lung. Anna lay on a narrow cot in her office, staring at the water stains on the ceiling tiles. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the strobe of police lights and the flash of Grip's unreadable eyes. Outside, the street was tomb quiet. Even the idling engines had been shut off to let the neighborhood sleep. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic ticking of cooling motorcycle exhaust pipes in the heavy air. Then, a new sound cut through the silence. It was faint, a hollow scrape, followed by the metallic rattle of the chain-link fence at the rear of the property. The alleyway. Anna sat up, her breath catching in her throat. She swung her legs off the cot, her bare feet hitting the sticky linoleum. She crept out of the office and down the pitch-black hallway toward the back kitchen. The kitchen window overlooked the narrow dirt alley behind the shelter. It was entirely unlit, a pitch-black corridor of overflowing dumpsters and broken pallets. Anna pressed her face against the glass, straining to see through the grime. A shadow moved against the deeper shadows of the brick wall. It was small, jerky, and erratic. A young man, maybe 19, wearing a black hoodie pulled up over his head. In his right hand, he carried a heavy glass bottle stuffed with a dirty white rag, a Molotov. Tommy Higgins hadn't given up. He had just changed his tactic. If he couldn't walk through the front door, he was going to burn the back wall. Anna opened her mouth to scream, to bang on the glass, to wake Brenda and the kids. Before she could make a sound, the darkness in the alley completely shattered. It wasn't a shout or a warning. It was an explosion of pure, calculated violence. Two massive shapes detached themselves from the shadows behind the dumpsters. The bikers hadn't just guarded the street. They had secured the perimeter. The first man, a hulking figure entirely clad in black leather, hit the kid at a full sprint. The impact sounded like a car crashing into a tree. The kid was lifted completely off his feet and slammed against the brick wall of the shelter. The heavy glass bottle flew from his hand, shattering harmlessly against the dirt, spilling raw gasoline that instantly filled the hot air with toxic fumes. Anna clamped a hand over her mouth, backing away from the window. Her stomach heaved. She couldn't look away. The violence outside wasn't cinematic. It wasn't clean or choreographed. It was ugly, guttural, and deeply intimate. The second biker grabbed the kid by the hood, dragging him face first down into the dirt. The kid thrashed, letting out a high, panicked scream that was instantly choked off by a heavy boot stepping squarely onto the back of his neck. From the front of the house, a heavy metal door slammed. Footsteps jogged down the side alley. Grip appeared in the dim ambient light. He didn't run. He walked with a terrifying, measured slowness toward the kid pinned in the dirt. Anna's hands shook so violently she had to grip the edge of the aluminum sink to stay upright. "Don't kill him," she prayed silently, the words repeating in her head like a frantic mantra. "Please don't kill him here. Please don't let me be the reason someone dies." Grip crouched down next to the kid. He reached out and yanked the kid's right arm out from under his body, pinning it flat against the hard-packed dirt. Grip leaned in close, whispering something into the kid's ear. The kid sobbed, a pathetic broken sound that carried through the thin glass of the kitchen window. Then, Grip placed his heavy knee directly onto the kid's elbow. He leaned his weight forward. Crack! It was a sharp, wet sound, like a thick, dry branch being snapped over a knee. The kid screamed, a raw, tearing howl of absolute agony. The biker standing on his neck pressed down harder, muffling the sound into the dirt. Anna gagged, turning away from the window. She dry-heaved over the sink, her entire body trembling violently. The sheer brutality of the act horrified her. She had wanted protection. She had wanted a shield. She hadn't fully understood that a shield made of violent men requires violence to maintain its strength. Outside, Grip stood up. He grabbed the kid by the collar of his hoodie and hauled him to his feet. The kid's right arm hung at a grotesque, unnatural angle. Grip gave him a hard shove toward the end of the alley. "Tell Tommy." Grip's voice carried through the glass, cold and utterly devoid of emotion. "Next time it's his neck." The kid stumbled away, sobbing and cradling his ruined arm, disappearing into the darkness of the street. The two other bikers melted back into the shadows without a word. Grip stood alone in the alley for a moment. He looked down at his hands. Then he walked slowly toward the rusty spigot attached to the back of the shelter. He turned the valve. Water sputtered out, splashing loudly against the dirt. Grip thrust his hands under the cold stream, methodically rubbing the dirt and whatever else was on them away. Anna wiped her mouth with the back of her trembling hand. She felt utterly sick, but she forced herself to move. She unlocked the back door, the deadbolt sliding back with a heavy thud. She stepped out into the humid night. The smell of spilled gasoline and wet dirt was overpowering. She carried a clean white cotton towel from the kitchen dispenser. Grip didn't look up when the door opened. He just kept holding his hands under the rushing water. Anna walked over to him. Her legs felt like hollow reeds. She stopped a foot away from him and held out the towel. Grip turned off the spigot. He looked at the white towel, then up at Anna's face. He saw the pale, horrified shock in her eyes. He saw the violent trembling in her hands. He knew exactly what she had seen. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to justify it. He took the towel from her hands, his wet fingers brushing briefly against hers. His skin was rough, calloused, and freezing cold from the water. "You shouldn't be awake, Anna," Grip said softly, wiping his hands dry. "I heard the fence," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. Grip tossed the damp towel over his shoulder. He looked at the shattered glass and the dirt, then back at her. The harshness in his face had slipped, just a fraction, revealing a profound, bone-deep weariness. "This is what it costs," Grip said, his tone devoid of any bravado. It was just a flat statement of fact. You asked for the wolves. You don't get to look away when they bite. He turned and walked back toward the front of the house, his heavy boots crushing the broken glass of the Molotov into the dirt, leaving Anna alone in the dark with the overwhelming stench of gasoline. Friday brought a sky the color of a bruised plum. The stagnant heat finally broke under the weight of an impending thunderstorm. Thunder rattled the loose window panes of the Safe Harbor Refuge, a deep, atmospheric bass that rivaled the idling engines on the street below. Anna stood at the kitchen sink, a sponge clutched in her fist. She was scrubbing the stainless steel basin where she had dry heaved 48 hours earlier. The smell of bleach was blinding, stinging her eyes, but she couldn't stop scrubbing. The phantom scent of raw gasoline and the wet, terrible snap of bone echoed in her head on an infinite loop. You're taking the finish off the metal. Anna flinched, dropping the sponge. Brenda stood in the doorway, a laundry basket braced against her pregnant hip. Brenda's nervous lip chewing had subsided over the last 2 days. The deep purple bags under her eyes were fading. She looked rested. They all did. Just trying to keep it sanitary, Anna murmured, avoiding Brenda's gaze. They're leaving, Brenda said quietly. Anna's head snapped up. What? Not the bikers, Brenda clarified, pointing a thumb toward the front of the house. The other ones, Tommy's guys. Anna hurried past Brenda, jogging down the hallway to the office. She pressed her face against the security grate. Fat, heavy drops of rain were just beginning to smack the asphalt. Across the street, backed up to the curb of the abandoned lot, was a rusted box truck. 5 young men in hooded sweatshirts were frantically tossing garbage bags, duffel bags, and a heavy iron safe into the back. They moved with a jerky, terrified urgency, constantly throwing panicked glances over their shoulders. Tommy Higgins stood by the cab of the truck. He looked 10 years older than he had on Tuesday. His tracksuit was filthy, and a nasty yellow bruise blossomed along his left cheekbone. He wasn't yelling orders. He was just smoking a cigarette down to the filter, his shoulders hunched against the rain. They were running. The realization settled over Anna like a heavy, cold quilt. The territory had become too hostile. The predators had moved in, and the scavengers were packing up their den. On the porch of the shelter, Grip sat in his canvas chair. He wasn't whittling today. He simply watched the box truck load up. 6 other bikers stood along the property line, arms crossed over their heavy leather cuts, silent sentinels in the downpour. They didn't taunt Tommy. They didn't shout insults or flex their dominance. The absolute crushing silence of their presence was infinitely more humiliating. It was the quiet, undeniable assertion of total control. Tommy tossed his cigarette into the wet gutter. He looked across the street, his eyes meeting Grip's for a split second. Tommy broke the gaze first, looking down at his sneakers. He climbed into the passenger side of the box truck and slammed the door. The engine ground horribly before catching, and the truck lurched forward, blowing a cloud of black exhaust as it turned the corner and disappeared. The block was theirs. Anna let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 5 days. Her knees buckled slightly, and she caught herself on the edge of the filing cabinet. It was over. The siege was lifted. She walked to the front door, pulling the deadbolt back. The new oak frame Chibs had bolted in felt immovable, permanent. She pushed the door open and stepped out onto the porch. The rain felt cold and clean against her face. Grip didn't turn his head. He just watched the empty corner where the box truck had vanished. "They're gone," Anna said. Her voice was barely a whisper against the drumming rain. "They'll find a new block," Grip replied, his tone flat. "Another empty lot. Another neighborhood that the cops don't drive through." "But they aren't here," Anna insisted, stepping closer. "They won't come back." Grip finally looked at her. Rain ran down the deep creases of his weathered face, dripping from the jagged scar over his eye. "No, they won't come back here. The street is toxic to them now." He stood up, grabbing the back of the canvas chair and folding it with one fluid motion. He looked down the street at his men. He gave a short, sharp whistle, 2 fingers in his mouth. It cut through the rain like a gunshot. The men standing along the fence line immediately broke formation. They walked to their bikes, threw legs over the heavy leather seats, and reached for their ignitions. "You're leaving too," Anna said. It wasn't a question. "Job's done," Grip grunted. Anna looked at the massive man in black leather. She thought of the kid with the broken arm in the alley. She thought of the brutal, uncompromising violence that lived right beneath the surface of these men. She should be terrified. She should be counting the seconds until they were gone. Instead, an ugly, complicated gratitude swelled in her chest. They were monsters, yes, but they were monsters who had chosen to stand in front of her door when the rest of the world looked away. "How much do I owe you?" Anna asked, crossing her arms over her chest against the chill. Grip stopped, halfway down the concrete steps. He turned back, his expression entirely unreadable. "You think you can afford us, Anna?" "I have a little in the emergency fund. It's not much, but I can't just take this for free. I know how the world works." A dry, harsh sound escaped Grip's throat. It took a second for Anna to realize it was a laugh. It was completely devoid of humor. "Keep your money, fix your roof," Grip said. He reached into his deep leather pocket and pulled out a small, heavy cardboard box. He tossed it onto the porch. It landed at Anna's feet with a dull thud. She looked down. It was a box of heavy-duty, galvanized lag screws. "Chibs said you might need to reinforce the back door next," Grip said, turning his back on her. "Lock it up, Anna. Don't open it for strangers." By Saturday morning, the neighborhood felt like a crime scene immediately after the yellow tape is taken down. The air was unnervingly still. The sun baked the damp pavement, drawing up a smell of wet concrete and old trash, but the suffocating scent of gasoline was completely gone. At 10 a.m., the ground began to vibrate. Anna was in the common room helping Leo piece together a battered cardboard puzzle. She felt the vibration in her teeth before she heard the sound. The low, mechanical growl rolled down the street, bouncing off the brick facades of the low-income housing units. She stood up, brushing cookie crumbs from her lap, and walked to the reinforced door. She opened it just as the vanguard turned the corner. It wasn't 15 bikes this time. It was the entire charter. 200 motorcycles poured onto the narrow street, a tidal wave of roaring iron and polished chrome. The noise was absolute, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums and rattled the ribcage. It drowned out the city. It drowned out the world. They didn't stop this time. They rolled through in a tight, disciplined column, riding two abreast. The men didn't look at the shelter. They kept their eyes fixed forward, faces hidden behind dark sunglasses and heavy beards. They were a military unit on the move, an invading force suddenly abandoning the conquered territory. Anna stood on the porch, her hands gripping the wooden railing. Near the middle of the pack, a massive black Harley rumbled past. Grip sat straight-backed in the saddle. He didn't turn his head. He didn't offer a wave or a cinematic salute. But as he passed the front steps of the safe harbor refuge, he raised his right hand off the throttle, just an inch. 2 fingers tapped the brim of an invisible hat. A fleeting, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. Then he accelerated, the heavy exhaust drowning out any chance of a reply, the bike surging forward to catch the lead pack. Anna watched them go. The procession took 3 full minutes to clear the block. The thunder rolled away, chasing them down the highway, fading into a low, distant hum before vanishing entirely. The silence that rushed back into the street was deafening. It felt empty. Brenda stepped out onto the porch behind Anna, wrapping her thin sweater around her shoulders. She looked at the abandoned lot across the street. There was no box truck. There were no thugs hanging on the corner. Just an empty weed-choked patch of dirt. "Are they coming back?" Brenda asked quietly. "No," Anna said, picking up the box of heavy-duty screws Grip had thrown onto the porch yesterday. The cardboard was slightly damp from the rain. "No, they aren't. We're alone again." Anna looked at the new, raw oak frame bolted into the brick. She thought of the sickening crack of bone in the alleyway. She touched the cold, tarnished brass of the Winged Death's head bottle opener, still hanging on her keychain in her pocket. She had asked for help from the dark, and the dark had answered. It had demanded its bloody toll, paid in full by the very men who had terrorized them. She wasn't the same woman who had swept up broken glass on Monday night. The exhaustion remained, but the helpless terror had burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp realism. The cops wouldn't save them. Society wouldn't save them. Safety wasn't a right. It was a fortress you had to build, bolt by bolt. "We aren't alone," Anna said, turning back toward the heavy steel door. "We've got each other, and we've got a secure perimeter." She stepped inside. The air smelled of bleach and powdered formula. She waited for Brenda to walk past her into the hallway. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Anna pulled the heavy door shut. She reached out, grasped the deadbolt, and threw it. Clack. The sound was sharp, metallic, and final. It echoed through the quiet house, a definitive period at the end of a violent sentence. Anna rested her forehead against the cool steel for a brief second. The wolves were gone. The street was quiet, but as she walked back to the office to finish the paperwork, she knew she would never look at the shadows the same way again. If this gritty reality check hit you hard, hit that like button right now. We don't sugarcoat the world here. We bring you the raw, unvarnished stories of human survival that the mainstream media ignores. The line between hero and monster is often just a matter of perspective and desperation. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the real world isn't black and white. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always riding with us for the next deep dive. Stay vigilant, stay gritty,